Hello, everyone. Connie and Sandra and the rest of the class. Nice to be with everyone. This is our group final. We will each be discussing our topics and our findings and what we found relevant from the class, maybe difficulties or, enjoyable parts of our journey. And so each of us will have 5 minutes and then we'll discuss it amongst the group for 5 minutes and have a nice discussion. Um, Anything to add, ladies? This is the amazing Amissa and Navi.
Great.
All right, so I can go into my topic or my subject. So just some background. My topic is analyzing and improving a young Black man's journey as a first generation student pursuing post-secondary, a post-secondary degree. I want to look at what helps and what hinders him along their journey or them along their journey, all the way from childhood or how they were raised, all the way up until to and through that post-secondary degree. I was able to interview two people I had met for the first time. I have they were a group. I was selected them from a group of doctors. They fit my criteria, which was just a Black man who is either in or has graduated from higher education and is a first generation. I said that. So went in, just kind of asking them questions about their journey. And my findings kind of came out in four major categories to start my first set of like coding. And it was kind of external factors, which cover like parents, teachers, mentors, things like that. And then internal factors, which covered like personal identity, like being in a school setting as a Black man, and then like values, personal values, and things like that. And then I looked at the educational system as a whole. I allowed them to digest that. And then also took a look at the generational view from everything of a young Black man changing his trajectory and his family's trajectory. And so the men were both, they just happened to be within 40 to 50, graduated and still practicing what they use. And like I just said, some specific findings were the parents, regardless of if the parents had an educational background or not, it was the choice of the parents to make it a value to their kids. Because in both settings, one had parents that were backgrounds and they pushed him, and one didn't have, but they still pushed him. And they both said that was very significant in their growth process or journey. Internally, one of my biggest findings was just that they both dealt with like they both exhibited themselves as the only Black man in their programs. And so they talked about how that was a stressor in itself, as well as like what's the word I want to use? As well as them like Navi, what was the word I used? Or I'm thinking of that's right, I'm just gonna tell you. I'll come back to it later if I think about it. But yeah, and then education wise, both men just on their own said how the system is failing. They both mentioned the grade school system, which would be elementary school. And they also mentioned once they got to the higher education, they didn't feel prepared at all from their previous forms. Even the master's level didn't prepare them for how big of a jump the dissertation level was. And then the last thing I'll wrap up with was just on the generational side. They both had a very confident and calm direction for their children. Neither of them were forceful. They both, and this is just by coincidence, but they both just said that they will promote it. They will encourage that option to make sure it's there for them at an early age. But they both mentioned that college isn't for everybody, and whatever the child may, lean towards, that's what they would support. They wouldn't like not disown, but dislike the child's decision if they didn't choose higher education, as long as they had a path and plan. Those are two big words that were thrown around, were path and plan. So those are just some things that some findings that I went through in my studies. I can open it up to any questions or discussions or anything.
Al, I don't know what word you were thinking of, but being the only Black men in their program, we talked before about how they had to kind of live up to other people's expectations and maybe even conceal their own identity, like the truth of who they are, in order to fit in the educational setting.
Imposter syndrome.
Ah, that's it. Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for. So thank you for that. But yeah, it's tough because you don't have anybody to relate to, nobody in your community. And we just stated nobody in your program can really relate to what you're coming to. So even if you do want to go to your advisors per se, they can give you surface level, advice, but nothing that's really in the experience. And any student can say that about any part of their experience. So this isn't just a racial thing, or can be shaped in any way or form. We all have our ways that advisors can't connect to us. So I just want to make that clear as well.
Al, I found it really interesting that for both of your participants, their parents really stressed the importance of education, whether or not they themselves had that educational background. But then coming out of that, their own relationship to their children around education is a little different, that they're sort of like, I'll support you either way. I'm not going to push you in that direction because it may not be for everyone. And I found that really fascinating. And I wondered what you think about that kind of generational shift, like how their parents felt about education versus how they feel about it in relation to their own children.
That's a great question. And that was a great point. And I kind of took the positive approach of saying that, not that there's less pressure, but it is more common than maybe in their generation. In their generation, this might have been the only option. I would say now, during times, there's multiple ways to be successful or to be to improve your generational trajectory. So I think from my perspective, that might have a lot to do with it. And so, yeah, I'll just take that approach and say, yeah, I think it's more of not them not pushing it, because I'm sure it'll be the first option they present, or not sure, but I don't want to speak for them. But from what I got, it'll be the first option. They're proud of what they do, and each of them, in different ways, appreciated the honor of being a doctor. And so I'm sure just with them living with a parent like that, they will value the prestige of education. And that's really the principle, not necessarily higher education, just the principle of education and growing and pushing, what we can be or what we can achieve. Something personally, my mother always told me was, her goal was always give us more than her parents gave her. And it would always be a hope of hers that, it was my goal to give my kids more than she gave me. And of course, that's subjective to what more is and all that stuff. But just in general principle, um, it's about that.
Al, just a question about the coding.
Mhm.
You talked about how they both had calm and confident direction for their children, and how they promoted and encouraged them to choose their path and plan. And I was just curious how that kind of thing showed up as support, or what did you call it in your codes?
So I call that specifically was um, like more of an internal perception, what their experiences were and how they turned that into their motivation. So in my coding, I have like motivation and values. And so I would kind of digest that as, okay, they were taking in things, but it's about the expression of how it turned out in reality, how they use it in their life, how they, um, because we all know, regardless of, what happened to us, well, I won't say that, but we always have a choice to either use our stuff for our positive, even though there is negative components to things.
Was there any part of the interview process that you found particularly challenging?
Yes, just balancing the emotional journey with the actual, not actual, but kind of logical, factual stuff we're looking for. It was hard trying to balance the men, trying to let them express their story, but still while keeping them on my specific topic. Because they did want it to go into other things that were, related, but not necessarily essential to my project. So that was kind of the tough part. Still being there for them, being sympathetic, empathetic, but still guiding them through and not cutting them off. So that was pretty tough.
Just curious, how did you bring them? Oh, sorry, Amissa. Just curious, how did you bring them back? Because it's something that I found too.
Yeah, just first and foremost, always acknowledging their points, always giving them reciprocation and validation, and then just kind of being creative enough to tailor my next comment to ease into where I want to go. So like, okay, thank you for sharing that. Blah blah blah. I see what you said. How do you think what you said applied to maybe this factor, and kind of switch it up like that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if there's anything that you kind of learned in this process that you think will impact or shape your dissertation inquiry, like anything around the methodology, or what it was like, sort of what you were just speaking to, like what it was like actually being in the interview process,
Yeah.
or anything that you found in this kind of pilot study, any data that you think might shape the direction you go in.
Yeah. Great question. I think kind of continuing, just I could see myself in the people I were interviewing and the people I was interviewing. Um, and I just want to continue to, I don't know if separate is the best word, but kind of continue to separate the emotional from like what I need to put in my dissertation. Um, these are subjects that we're really passionate about, and it's so easy for us to just go off. And so it's like I've been learning how to just tailor in and tailor in. And these interviews were just another example. I kind of felt myself self balancing or self checking, being aware of, okay, I can see he's a, you know, still while I'm listening to him, but I can tell he's in that experience. as opposed to telling me about the experience from this state right here, if that makes sense. And so that little subtle thing, I want to make sure we address the experience, but from the place of now, not the place of in that experience. I think that will go a long way in just the findings and the teachings that I can come out with my study or with my dissertation. I think that'll help a lot more than just, telling people stories. But that needs to be heard as well. So just that balance. But yeah, I appreciate the questions. Those help me think about and clarify my topics. So I really appreciate it. And then we have a lovely speaker up next.
Who? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, let me start this timer here. All right. I'm gonna share my inquiry question here. Actually, let me just share screen so you can read it with me. Here we go. One, how do multiple pathways to wholeness in lived experiences inform healing? So I'm taking a look at different people's stories and different people's paths to healing and to wholeness. That's what the multiple pathways are other people's stories and my own. So there have been different times in my life where I've had access to different healing tools and modalities that were inaccessible in other places and in other situations. So those are multiple pathways too. And then in wholeness here is in reference to the meeting of the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the dark, both dualities coming together. And healing, I just want to be clear that healing is not curing, but there is a sense of relief in leading to resilience. So I'm going to stop my share here. But I interviewed my parents for this project, for my pilot study, because I'm so curious to know how my parents' paths to heal have influenced my own life. And in Resmaa Menakem's book, My Grandmother's Hands, he writes about the transfer of trauma and how it starts at an individualized level, and then it becomes a familial norm, communal norm, and cultural norm. And then he also claims that resilience works in a similar fashion. And so my familial norm is resilience. And I've seen it spread out to the community too. And I want to see that flip for our culture. Instead of suffering, I want to see that flip to heal and to be resilient. So that's the reason behind the study here. And my mom was in an accident in '94 where a deer leapt through her windshield and it was trapped in the car and it was kicking her like she was a rag doll. And her car had drifted to the side of the road and stopped without any brake lights. And the truck behind her passed and came back around, and there were two hunters, and they got the deer, they killed the deer on the spot, and then they covered my mom's body with a blanket. And long story short, my mom was in a hospital bed for 5 years and was touch deprived. She couldn't be intimate with her beloved or her daughters. And so there were so many other ways that we could support each other though. And to have the community jump in and to have my grandma raise us was just the beginning. So I talked about that process with my parents, and where that came from, how it was instilled in them. And my mom talked about the power of presence and prayer and honoring the needs of the body, which might be to slow down or to sit down or be still or to listen to music and be moved by the rhythms, since she couldn't move her body herself. And then also the combination of the minds of the doctors and the patience of everybody involved. And she talked about even in detail, like how her hair, oh man, already 1 minute left. Oh my gosh. Well, how it took weeks for the doctor to unpeel her hand even. And so anyways, just hearing these little or to hear the anecdotes about the support of family was very telling of the power um, of presence, and how her family influenced her, and my dad, to be grateful even for the hardships in life, for those are our greatest teachers. So yeah, something that came up in both interviews was gratitude, came up a lot, and family support. And I'm extremely blessed to have had that foundation. And I also feel like it's my duty to continue the resilience transfer, for that has been passed on to me. So.
Thank you for sharing, Navi. Um, yeah, great story. Beautiful story. I know you shared it with me before. So blessings to everybody involved and your whole family, and I want to congratulate all you guys for being so resilient, and you for, continuing that path. I wanted to ask the last part you said. You said you feel happy about continuing it. If you could put a word on it, would it be more of a duty or more of an honor or responsibility, or maybe a collection of the words? Or
Duty, honor, and responsibility. Yeah, all three for sure. Yeah. Because I've been dealt a hand of cards of great fortune, to have seen a collective come together to rebuild, and also to see suffering from such a young age, and to have open communication. That transparency is so it's imperative. Um, and I know that not everybody is blessed with a situation like mine, but my family would take in other people too into their families, or into their family, and I watched that ripple effect, and I know that it's that suffering has become our cultural norm, and so there's great urgency to heal, and we have to start inward, and then we can be equipped to help one another. So there's urgency, and yeah, definitely a responsibility.
Navi, I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of how you came to be the beautiful person that you are after learning a little bit more about your family and their stories. I'm just like grateful to know you a little bit more through knowing, the people that you come from. So thank you for sharing that. I'm like, oh, well, of course you come from folks with, such capacity for care and connection, um, because look at who you are. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was really curious to know if there was anything you heard from your parents that surprised you, right? Because you have the lived experience of being raised by them and sort of living through some of this with them. But was there anything that you learned of like their perspective or experience on those circumstances that maybe you didn't know or that surprised you?
Yeah, I've always been curious, like, but never wanted to ask because it felt like overstepping boundaries. But I was always curious to know what kind of arrangement my parents had, because they couldn't be intimate anymore and they were in their 30s, and that's a really big deal. And so my dad, he shared during his interview how he stayed faithful, and how he had made a commitment and married his beloved years before. And how there were just so many other joys in life that he couldn't even be bothered by, you know, any missing links. And so his commitment and faithfulness to his wife and family was something that he was so moved by. He said that he got so much more time with his kids because he had to braid our hair and do our nails and get the kids dressed and bathed and things like that, and had to do some of those things for my mom too. And I remember brushing my mom's hair and spoon feeding her whenever I was a little kid. But I saw it modeled for me. And then I was also surprised to hear that nobody else stopped for my mom aside from that one truck. And she had always remembered the story that people were pulling over and helping, when in fact they would just pull on by or drive on by. So anyways, I think the divine synchronicity is something that came up over and over again during the call. In definitely the acknowledgement of the blessings, and yeah, just recognizing the power of honoring the stories despite how challenging they are. And yeah, just grateful to something far beyond us.
Nice, thank you. I just have one more question. When you started, you mentioned the duality of the light and the dark, aspects of life. But you also mentioned like staying focused, not necessarily on the light, but on the prayer and the stuff you mentioned. Would you say there's any balance or any type of like percentage you use to, stay focused, or is that like a situational thing, or how was your personal experience with that?
Yeah, well, what came up in the interviews is that my mom, she lives in chronic pain, and that was 28 years later or something. Yeah, 28 years later. And she just had to focus on healing. She had to focus on getting well. And she knew that her body was in pieces and her bones were smashed like a bag of potato chips. And if she was focused on the destruction, then that's where her energy would be. And so she talked about the importance of getting better and how she wanted to hold a pen and she wanted to feed herself and she wanted to she wanted to take a shower on her own and she wanted to walk again and go to work and so on and so forth. So for her to really, be in the dark and be with the pain, but also to watch it dissipate and to be witness to the impermanence of things, being present is what was so powerful for her. And for myself, I actually learned a similar lesson in the importance of being in the depths of the darkness and finding a turning point. Sometimes I think of it as kind of like a resurrection, but I also think of it as like a hibernating and also like being in some place that's dark. Sometimes I just want to escape. I want to find the light or unearth or whatever it is, but being there and to find the nutrients and to receive the water that's there and to connect with the roots all around is really, really where I find a lot of the deepest healing work for myself. So that's the meeting of the light and the dark there. Yeah, so the percentage though, that's a good question. I think that I try to be grateful throughout each and every day. And I also try to really be with anything that's not just joy. I try to be, that's with joy, I want to be with joy, but I also want to be with the suffering and everything in between too. So that presence for me is key. So no percentages, just being alive to what is.
Thank you.
All right, we've got the fabulous, the mystic Amissa.
It is so delightful to be with two of my favorite people in this whole department. So there's no one else I would rather share this work with. So thank you both for sharing yours. So my inquiry is about the process of healing for Black women who have survived sexual violence, and particularly what we might call intracommunal sexual violence, meaning sexual violence that happens within Black community or within family even. For my actual dissertation, I am interested in using autoethnographic methods, probably a performance autoethnography. And so for this pilot study, my original idea was to do both a self-interview and an interview with another participant, to develop an interview guide, to have myself actually answer those questions in sort of like a critical self-interviewing technique to sort of practice that kind of navigating the subjectivity and reflexivity that's kind of there, that's going to be inherent in my dissertation research. But then I also wanted to interview someone else to sort of gain the interview skills, but also to see where the data mapped onto each other or not. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. I wasn't able to interview another person. So the data that I'm working with is from my own self-interview that was conducted by a person very close to me who I trust a lot and who knows a little bit about my history of trauma. So I developed the interview questions, kind of set them aside and didn't think about them. And then this person who's close to me interviewed me about my experience. And so that's the data that I'm working with. And here are some things that I found in terms of what healing actually is, what the experience or process of healing is as it relates to this phenomenon. One of the big things that came up was reconnection to the body. So there is an articulation of like a process of how connection to the body gets severed because of this particular kind of trauma, that the body becomes a site of shame or unworthiness, that the body becomes kind of a thing to numb or suppress, and that one of the processes of healing, but also a marker that healing is happening, is that there is some reconnection between self and body. So the body actually becomes quite loud and has a lot to say after many years of being silenced for a long time. So reconnection to the body, listening to the body, being able to check in with the body and ask, body, what do you need right now? That is a part of the healing process, and also sort of a marker that shows that healing is happening. One of the other big categories that came up is around relationship and belonging. That again, the sort of the shame and the unworthiness that sort of result from that trauma can lead to this feeling of not belonging. And that this is a particular kind of trauma that I think necessitates relationship in order for some healing to happen, right? There's some work that's happening internally, but there's some aspect of this healing phenomenon that can only happen in relationship with someone else or with other people, where there is a sense of what it means to feel that I belong, even with all of my shadows, right? Even with all of this trauma, like that I can be seen and known and accepted and loved, even and maybe because of who I've become out of that's a relational aspect of healing that I think without that, there's an aspect that's missing, right? So there's kind of the internal process of reconnection to the body, but then there's the external process of relational healing. Lineage was something that came up also. So kind of thinking about, and Navi, you mentioned this a little bit about kind of the intergenerational aspect of both trauma and resilience. Recognition that this particular kind of trauma is something that there's no one in my maternal lineage who hasn't experienced this that I know of. And that some of those, even folks that I haven't gotten to meet in this realm, in this cosmos, but ancestors who have come through to really help facilitate and guide my healing process, that connection to lineage and sort of a worldview that says that what I experience isn't just about me, that I'm carrying something, but I'm also healing something, that the healing can go both ways. That like the healing that I experience is also healing for folks who come before me and folks who will come after me. And so that sense of lineage in terms of the process of healing was really important. Pleasure. Also sort of learning how to prioritize and find comfort with pleasure is another sort of aspect of the process of healing. And this is, it kind of mapped onto, you know, some of the work that I've read around pleasure activism, Adrienne Maree Brown. It maps onto Joan Morgan and some of her sort of Black feminist theory around pleasure and the Black female body as a way of processing and healing from trauma. And the idea that pleasure is actually something to which I have a right. That shame and unworthiness can make it seem as though one has no right to pleasure. And so naming that pleasure is something that I have a right to, and prioritizing the experience of that is something else that emerged in the data. And lastly, there's this idea of what I'm calling subversiveness. And that's sort of like what it means to be within a community. And when I say community, I'm thinking about sort of my racial identity, my gender identity, my sexuality, things like that. What it means to be inside of community and identify with community, but also to be able to name and recognize and call out the harm that happens within community for the goal of like greater communal healing, right? That there is a phenomenon that comes up in the literature around Black women and sexual violence, that a lot of Black women are hesitant to speak about their experiences because they feel such loyalty to community, and there's a fear of the impact that might have on community if we are to name the people who've harmed us and talk about our experiences. And so there has to be a certain level of subversiveness there, of being able to say, like, I'm willing to go against that norm, not just for my own personal healing, but because all of us will heal collectively when we can unearth this, when we can be honest about the harm, when we can commit to healing and preventing it moving forward. So that's an aspect that has taken me a lot longer to develop. Some of these other things started to develop earlier, but that the subversiveness and the willingness to say, because I love this community and because I love being a part of this community, I necessarily then can go against this particular norm around silencing and say the thing that needs to be said because I want all of us to heal. That's an aspect of the process of healing that I've identified that, yeah, it's still in its baby infancy phase. I'm still like kind of finding that, but it came up in the data, and I was excited, like, oh yeah, I guess I am doing that. Okay, I guess that is there. Yeah, those were kind of the main themes that emerged from this critical self interview. And yeah, I'm curious to see how this, I don't know, we'll see how it impacts my dissertation work, but also just how it impacts me as a person moving forward and navigating my own healing process.
Love it. Thank you for sharing that. A beautiful journey, beautiful cause. Yes, there's so many valid things that should just be, I don't want to say mainstream, but more common knowledge out there. Um, I mean, like you said, that's the basis of healing, is just being able to acknowledge. Um, and I mean, you have to be a powerful person. You have to be a confident person, which comes from the growth of trauma, tragedy. Um, but to be confident enough to say those things, um, and be that catalyst, that because you are working for good, and not just the good of yourself, the good of, like you say, generations before you and after you. So beautiful. And then I kind of just noticed, I mean, you have like a path to healing. Um, and it was great to hear you start with the inside connection, reconnecting with yourself, and acknowledging who you may have been or what may have happened, but still staying focused on who you want to be, and where you can go and what you know is right. And then externally connecting that was beautiful. Um, but I wanted to ask, do you think that the relational aspect that you talk about could ever come before the reconnecting the inside?
That's such a great question, Al, and thank you for all your feedback and responses. I I think one of the things that I learned in this study is that none of this is really linear. Um, and so all of these processes might be happening simultaneously. Um, Maybe for one person, it does begin with the relational, and that then allows them to feel safe enough to go inside, or vice versa. Um, and I think the other thing that I found is that, I would love to think of healing as like one big triumphant event that happens and then it's done and you did it. Yay, I healed. And the reality is that a lot of, I think what's so valuable about the relational aspect is that relationships can actually like trigger some of that stuff, but in like a positive way, right? Like it's very easy for me to say that I'm healed when it's just me here by myself and I'm not actually having to do the work of relating to another person. But like in relationship, we get those buttons pushed and those things triggered that then, allow us the opportunity to say, oh, whoa, okay, this is connected to this. This is coming up here. How do we navigate this in a way that has like love and care at its foundation? And so I don't know if there's like a one has to happen before the other. And I don't know that there's like okay, we did this, check, it's done, that it is kind of an ongoing thing. But I think the relational aspect is important because without that, we need other people to reflect things back to us and to spark things and trigger things and push buttons in a way that allows us to really say like, okay, where am I? I thought I was in this place, but like, whoa, this thing just came up. Maybe I'm not as far along as I thought I was. Maybe we need to go back here. So I think that's part of why it can be so helpful.
Appreciate it. Good.
So interesting. So interesting to, I mean, it resonates. I'm just thinking like, okay, I've dealt with this. And then it comes up however much time passes, and it's like, wait, hold on. I thought I put you away. And maybe I did. Maybe I put it away. And then it's unearthed and then comes out sideways and discombobulated and projected and and then it looks like somebody else is the bad guy, but then calming down is like, okay, wait, this is me. But also how do we live with this, and this part of us is welcome too. So you talked about belonging with your shadows and your trauma, in how not belonging is and I think that that's often a thought that rests with a lot of survivors, of sexual abuse and violence, and so I really appreciated what you talked about, the relational aspect. And let's see, yeah, you talked about different ways of processing in healing, and how you have a right. And I thought that that was extremely powerful, recognizing that you have the right, that you belong, and yeah, how the goal is greater communal healing, because of the loyalty for your community. But yeah, your story and your research is, it's just the beginning, because I think I talked a little bit about that resurrection in the darkness, and I think right now the darkness has become, I think there's a hibernating stage right now where this has become almost okay, that it's not condoned, but it's not talked about, and we just let it be as is, and we need to unearth it. Like you said, we need to unearth it and be honest about the harm, rather than following the norm of silencing. So those are just some reflections, but a question is, I was so curious to know, what was it like for you to be interviewed by somebody else about something that's so tender?
Thank you for all of your reflections, Navi. I love that sort of the hibernation image. I think I'm going to hold on to that. That feels really spot on and useful. So thank you for that. What was it like? It was actually really beautiful. I was very nervous going into it, but I think there was something about, this is a person who knows that I've experienced these events, and, we've had some conversation about it, but there was something about like the witnessing, and the feeling of, I don't really, there aren't too many spaces in my life where I am comfortable with being the person who's talking. Like I love to listen. When I'm teaching, I can get into that mode of like, I'm talking, but typically in my life, I haven't always felt like, oh, no one cares what I think. No one's going to care what I have to say. Like, I don't need to be talking right now. I can be quiet. I'm a better listener than I am a communicator, right? Like all these things that are also actually rooted in trauma. And so there was something really beautiful about a space that was like intentionally carved out, where someone was there just to listen to me and to bear witness to me. That is not something I've really experienced outside of like talk therapy, right? Which is like a different thing. And I think coming out of it, it almost felt like, oh, wow, maybe I do have something of value to offer. Like, and a validation of that I am worth listening to. That felt really important.
Al asked me a question earlier, and I'm just going to pass it on to you with the help of Al. Do you feel like it is your responsibility? Al, what were the other two? You're muted.
Maybe like honor or duty or something like that.
Gosh, I love that question. I love it so much, Al, and thanks for passing it back to me, because I have been sitting with it ever since you asked Navi. I've been sitting with it for myself too. Like, what do I think about that? And I mean, not to be cliche, but it does kind of feel like all of them. I think the honor and duty and responsibility, especially I think when I think of this aspect of lineage, like all of those things feel bound for me. Like I'm so honored to come from the people that I come from. Like it's such a beautiful thing to come from them. it's such an honor to be in relationship to them and communication with them. And because of that, it does feel like a responsibility and a duty, right? Like this is something that I take on because I have the honor and privilege of having that connection. So they all kind of feel bound up for me. But I want to think more through this. Maybe we can talk more through this because I think it's such a great question. And yeah, it's something that I'm going to keep thinking about for sure.
Fantastic. I think the both Al and Amissa, like you guys have such powerful voices in profound stories. I think it's such it's such important work in the world, and I love that CIIS brings together thought leaders and change agents, and you know, we're all doing this work as an act in social justice too. So yeah, so fantastic to be together.
Yes, definitely. Let's keep growing these roots downward and upward. Team Bonsai.
Team Bonsai for
All day,
life.
all day.
Yes.
All life, all life.
I love and appreciate you both so much. I'm really honored to be able to think with you and to grow alongside of you and to bear witness to your work. So thank you.
Awesome. And thank you to everybody out there, all the millions of people watching.
Yes.
You know, we love you guys out there.
Hit like, hit subscribe.
Smash that like button.
Follow, make sure you follow. Yeah, I'm gonna stop the recording. Thank you, Sandra and
Thank you.
Connie.